morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on the part of the world you're joining us from. We are happy to be here today to talk about climate finance, but importantly, to ask the question, where is the climate money? And I am joined by an interesting panel, and I would want to give them a second actually, per person to introduce themselves. Maybe start with you, Salina, from my right far.
Thank you very much, Julius, and thank you very much for this opportunity. And good morning, or good night, maybe, for people from wherever they are calling from. My name is Salina Sanou, and I'm the head of programs for the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance.
Thank you, Salina. Michael.
Good morning, everyone. It's exciting to be here today to discuss this important matter on climate finance. My name is Michael Okok from the National Environment Trust Fund, otherwise known as NETFUND.
Thank you so much, Lydia.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are watching from. My name is Lydia Muithya. I work for the Anglican Development Services Eastern, and I mobilize communities in Lower Eastern Kenya for climate action.
Thank you so much, Lydia. We'll be joined also by one of our colleagues virtually, who will introduce himself once we get there. Again, my name is Julius Mbatia. I'm your moderator for this session, a climate activist, but at the same time, I coordinate a youth platform called Youth for SDGs Kenya. And I'm seeing our colleague joining us also virtually, Bona Michael Okumu. Would you please introduce yourself from your end?
Yeah, thank you, Julius, and thank you, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm made to understand that the people who would be in other time zones, would wherever you are. My name is Michael Okumu from the Climate Change Directorate of the Ministry of Environment and Forestry in Kenya. I handle issues of climate change negotiations as well as climate finance at the Directorate. And I'm very glad to be on board. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. We would want to now have the discussion. What is the heart of this conversation and why it? And we all of us understand that it's normally discussed in policy spaces, policy meetings, policy corridors, and we want to do it today with the public. We want to understand where the climate money is. To you, Michael Okumu, where is this money? What exactly are we talking about as climate money? Just to ask you that question to help us decipher this.
Yeah, I'm saying that is a very interesting and important question to ask, especially to such a forum, because the Bible says somewhere that money answereth all things, and therefore when people are able to access money, they have maybe answers to most of their problems. Well, maybe let me start by saying that we call this climate finance purely because, or simply because this is money that is intentionally to address climate change adaptation, that is, to reduce vulnerabilities and the negative impacts of climate change to vulnerable communities and groups, or to address climate change mitigations, in which case it is to reduce emissions or to sequester carbon so as we mop up the greenhouse gases from the environment, or both. So this kind of definitions are what we call the real markers that helps us to be able to clearly delimit the difference between climate finance and development financing, because sometimes it's easy to confuse the two. So in brief, yes, climate finance is for those purposes. And these particular real markers clearly states that when you are talking of climate finance in a project or a program, it has to be explicitly stated in the objective of the program or project, not just things coming as a by the way, but something that was intentional. The project was intentionally meant to address either the adaptation or the mitigation. So in a nutshell, it is money. I get your second question is where this money is.
Before we even come to that question.
If I got you well, Julius?
That's true, but before we even get into that, thank you for actually unpacking what climate money intentionally set aside money to support climate action, adaptation, mitigation. We were going to have that conversation in detail. Before that, I would want to welcome our colleagues at In Action. Billy, I take it to you. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. This is the Art in Action section or segment, and I have a fantastic team of illustrators who are also very, very keen on where the climate action money is. And what they're going to be doing, Julius, is they're going to be listening to your conversation. They're going to be conversing with you. Only in this case, what they're doing is they're curating their experience. They're curating what they're hearing. They're curating what the discussion and where the direction the discussion is going. And within this period of time, they will be interpreting only as an artist can how the conversation is headed. And we're looking forward to seeing what it is their interpretation and communication is going to be. So I'd like to introduce my panel of fantastic illustrators. I have with me Victor Ndula, who is a digital illustrator. I also have Celeste Wamiru, also a digital illustrator. And I have Olonde Omondi, who is illustrating by hand. And each one of them fantastic at their craft, each one of them very climate conscious, very keen in the discussion. Let's look forward to what they have to present. So they will be hard at work, even as you are. Back to you, Julius.
Thank you so much, Billy, and the Art in Action team. And thank you also, Michael, for coming in and just telling us what exactly climate finance is. Lydia, you are at the community level. How important is money when you think about the climate change problem?
Thank you, Julius. I would say that money is very important because when we do vulnerability assessments and we do our planning, we look at what can be available internally and what we require externally. And when we look at what we require externally, it's the bulk of the amount that we require for climate actions at the county level.
Wait, so we need that money at the community level?
Yes, we need it like yesterday.
Because people are suffering and are going through problems due to climate change.
Yes, they are suffering because in the olden days we used to see like drought coming after like 10 years, but now we are seeing it every other season. So without climate finance, there's a real problem.
So they need it. Michael, let me just get to you. Is this money really there, Michael, from NETFUND? Where is this money?
Thank you, Julius. I think that would be, I thought maybe Michael Kum would have addressed that. But quickly, I will just say that it is a fact that Kenya is receiving very limited amount of climate finance. While you had those billion commitments and the $59 billion that has been contributed into the global kitty, of that, very little amount is getting into the country. And therefore, it is kind of limited or hard to access. But there are agencies or actors, I would say, that are trying to bring this money closer home. So that it can be accessed by various communities at the local level. For example, tapping into GCF, we have our National Environment Management Authority, which is accredited to access the GCF money directly. That is how Kenya can access these monies directly. But then there's also a challenge on our side as local communities in accessing it in terms of capacity to access that money. Because there's an element of ability to design programs or concepts that tap into these flows, and also just the capacity to write. And of course, on one hand, I would also put it into the difficult conditions and complexity of the nature of concepts and proposals that are required to access the money. So it's both sides. We need to enhance our capacity to access it, and on the other hand, those complexities need to be a little bit simplified.
Okay, thank you so much. You've talked about money flowing. Bwana Michael Okumu, just coming back to you, where is this money flowing from? Who is actually providing this money for us to talk about communities being able to even access this money? Bwana Michael.
Thank you very much, Julius. And I very much agree with what my namesake, Mr. Okok, has just said there. Well, the money is there. Well, most difficult part to believe. And let me say, by definition, from what I defined climate finance is as, we normally tend first and foremost to look so much from externally. But if we look at it even from internal sources, the domestic sources, you will find that even within your pocket you have climate finance. It only depends on what you decide to do with that money. So we can have also what we call domestic private sources, which is in the pockets of each and every one of us. When you intentionally use that money to ensure that you or people around you are more resilient to the impacts of climate change, or when you use that money to ensure that you reduce emissions or sequester carbon, or both, first and foremost, you have that money in your pocket and you will have achieved the goals of the UNFCCC. So that is, in a nutshell, what I'm trying to call domestic private sources. So we have money in our pockets. How we use it determines whether or not it is climate money. But we also have public sources, money that is actually allocated from the budget that is to address issues of climate change. That is what I could, you may allow me to call that to be domestic public sources. That is your tax being channeled to address climate change issues. So that is also a source of finance. But apart, over and above that, we have the channel that we so much talk about. That is the external sources, the international sources. That is, we have, of course, under the UNFCCC, we have what we call the finance mechanism, under which we have the GCF, the JEF, the Adaptation Fund, the special.
We seem to have technical challenges on the side of Michael, but he's given us a glimpse of exactly what climate money is and what kind of form it takes within the global space, international financing, and also the domestic level, which could be our own budget allocated to climate change action. Just to ask you, Lydia, for the sake of the community person down at the local level, how have communities accessed this money? Have they actually seen this money?
Thank you, Julius. At the community level, especially in Makueni and Kitui counties, there's a mechanism that has been developed, and it's stipulated in the climate change regulations. It is stipulated that for the community to get the climate finance, they have to do a participatory vulnerability assessment, and they also assess their capacity to implement some of the actions. And in these actions, they have to show that they are supporting climate resilience. The interventions are bringing unity to the community, and then they also have to present their proposal to the County Climate Change Planning Committee, which now recommends the money to go to the ground. We have done some projects using this mechanism, and we've seen communities benefiting from climate finance. They've done their priority interventions like mega sand dams, earth dams, rock catchments, and also distribution of existing borehole water. So we have seen communities benefiting from climate finance because they also do a simple theory of change. When they get the water, what else should they do? So they get into utilizing the water like in doing irrigation, and we've seen some of them accumulating a lot of income from the small businesses that they do after utilizing the water. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lydia. And you've really unpacked what exactly happens at the community level, community members getting to decide what they really want to do to deal with the climate problem. And then they're able to get some money from a fund you mentioned. And looking at it from a regional level, Salina, coming to you, we have had this discussion about it being difficult for people, for countries in the global south to access climate finance, climate money from global climate change funds, from other sources. What exactly is the problem? Why is it that we are not accessing this money?
Thank you very much, Julius, for that. And I'm really glad we're talking about this. And also glad to hear that at least in the kitty now we have about 59 billion, as Michael has put it, and glad also that we are accessing a bit also at the grassroots level. But I must say that the figures that we have, I think we have almost about 100 billion for the global that we needed. But you can see from what Michael is saying is that we only have now 59 in the kitty. So there is there's still a problem in fulfilling the commitments that were made. If I can go back to what Okumu was saying, and this, the different sources, you have different sources and also allocations, which have stayed at the level of rhetorics and are just estimates. So from the public sources, we are told about 21 billion. When you look at the private sources, about 55 billion. Those are the estimates. And when you look at of the carbon markets, about 2 billion, and also the multilaterals, about 20 billion. That is almost giving you about 100 billion or so, and now we have only 59. So I'm saying that there is a problem with that. And what is the problem? When you look at it actually from where I sit and where we work, there are very stringent regulations that are making it very difficult for people, especially in the global south, to access money. So special requirements, there are policies, regulations, there are strategies that are not easily understood and made user-friendly for people to access those things very easily. And the next thing is that I want to talk about is also the requisite data for people to understand what is happening. And GCF is a clear example of that. Then you have the high upfront costs for skills and for infrastructure development, institutional strengthening. GCF, again, is a very good example. And even when you look at the adaptation fund itself, that is a case, that's a good example to use in this. And to come back to what Lydia was saying, at the grassroots, the institutions at the grassroots, if we're looking at indigenous people, we're looking at women groups. These are institutions that do not have the capacities to develop bankable proposals to access these monies. So, and yet, they are the ones bearing the brunt of climate injustices. You would think that the people who cause the most damage are the ones that should really be putting more money in the kitty to support those people. So in short, it is really the developed countries that are accessing much more than we are in the global south in countries like Kenya. Thank you.
That's a really interesting perspective, Salina. You brought about, and this was also mentioned in the opening, that there is a commitment which goes way back in 2009 in Copenhagen, where developed countries are supposed to provide on an yearly basis $100 billion. And as you say, they are falling short of their commitment. At the same time, at the community level, colleagues are asking about how much more do we really need to ask for this money. So we need more money, that's what you're saying, but there's a commitment somewhere that is not being fulfilled. So this money flows, as you said again. Bwana Okuma, I want to bring you in if you are okay technically, and just want to ask you, how in this country does this money get to play out? So how much, for example, have we received, if you can look at the climate finance landscape, and how much is going to maybe adaptation, which should support vulnerable communities, and mitigation, if you compare, is there a discrepancy? So the communities are saying, and also Salina is saying, that there are stringent measures, and that they have to do, for example, proposals which are problematic. If you look at their demand, what do we need to do to support communities? Can we really change this trajectory?
Thank you, Julius. How to address this question about accessing climate finance at the community level? I think, and I do believe that a lot of work has to be done at the global scale to simplify those processes, number one. Because if you look at the process, I can imagine if an organization as huge as ours, for example, cannot easily access those funds, you have to pass through a accredited entity, and the accredited entity has to submit these proposals to GCF, for example. It is very difficult now for a very local, community organization. So we need to find ways of advocating first to make sure that access is much easier, the process is shortened, and of course the process of reviewing of these proposals, the timeline that it takes needs to be addressed. But most importantly, there's need for capacity building at the local level. How do we bring in local communities and build their capacity to design programs, to do proposals? How do we link them up with climate finance streams, whether bilaterals, whether multilaterals, whether with foundations or whoever is offering these opportunities? Also, there's need for just local linkages with even local banks. At the moment, KCB, for example, having been accredited, is actually designing, developing pipelines of projects. How many community organizations are submitting their proposals there? It's quite, I'm very sure the number will be very low because they don't have that capacity. So let's invest in building that capacity, and again, awareness. Our local community is even aware of these opportunities. So that awareness, capacity building really needs to be invested in by both government and development partners and all actors, civil society organizations. They can help do this.
Thank you so much for that. Let me come to you, Lydia. You have talked about how communities in your county have actually accessed this money. Were there challenges, to be honest? Or did you just have communities go to the county government and were given money? Is it that easy? What were the challenges? What did you do about them?
Thank you, Julius. I would say that it wasn't very easy because they have to do the vulnerability assessments, which is a participatory process taking like 5 days.
And what is this vulnerability assessment? What is it exactly? What does it do in a nutshell?
Okay, it's like a community appraisal to understand where they are in terms of climate change vulnerabilities and what options are there for them to address those vulnerabilities. And so it's a process that requires some facilitation. And then once they do the vulnerability assessments, then they come up with they prioritize the interventions, and they have to come up with a proposal which they present to the County Climate Change Planning Committee. The proposals are simple, and there's a guideline. So it requires just somebody to take them through, and they are able to fill it in. So the challenge, I would say, is that with the vulnerability assessments, we've been seeing like a community coming up with 10 interventions. but the available amount is only for 1 or 2 projects. So there's a challenge of financing. The counties are not able to meet all the priorities that come out. And again, I would also say that the coordination requires a bit of strengthening, because if we are working like in Kitui, 40 wards, then it means that somebody has to move up and down, and the climate change actors have to coordinate so that there is no duplication and that they are doing it in the same way. So the other challenge is about the capacity to do this kind of work. Most of the counties do not have staff or rather personnel to do the vulnerability assessments and also the proposal development. So those are some of the challenges.
Just to come back to you, Michael Okok, we have seen, for example, in this country that money has flowed from the report that we were just referencing, and we had the technical hitch with Sir Okumu, that finance has come, yes, but most of the money is not even going to supporting adaptation. Adaptation, which is the priority of this country. Most of the money is going to support mitigation, looking at how to cut greenhouse gas emissions. Why the discrepancy? Why is it difficult to support adaptation from a researcher's perspective?
First of all, we must acknowledge that the owners of the money don't care about the adaptation. They are more industrialized, so they would rather invest in reducing emission, but also at the same time, they are more advanced in the assets that are required to adapt, so they really not feel the threat of adaptation. And consequently, the money they avail, they say is for mitigation. So what do? We prepare programs targeting mitigation because we want to access that money. So that is one reason why you see a lot of that money going to mitigation than adaptation. Also, there's that belief that let's focus on mitigation, let's focus on abating, sequestering carbon, and they think that African countries or even the global south in totality has that potential. So they'll rather put money to do afforestation and everything, but because the impacts of climate change are very personal, so they really affect us and they don't feel it. Yeah. So basically, for me, that's why I think there's a lot of money in mitigation and little in adaptation. Another thing is that it is easier to put figures in mitigation. Yeah. It's easier to put figures in mitigation where you just say, we have abated this amount of tonnage of CO2 equivalent, but how do you quantify adaptation? So demonstrating value for money in that particular aspect has been very difficult in programming for, climate change actions. So that's what I think. Interesting
perspective there. And just to come back to you, Okumu, at the global level, don't we really have a way to check that adaptation is not left behind when providing finance, when developed countries are providing finances to the global south, the developing and vulnerable countries? Is there a way to check this?
Yeah, so let me say that in principle, under the UNFCCC or under the financial mechanism of the UNFCCC, there should be a parity between adaptation finance and mitigation finance. But unfortunately, as Mr. Okok has clearly elaborated, the problem has been that there is more interest in the mitigation bit of it, and reasons is that one, it is easier to quantify and verify facts and figures. It is easier, therefore, to commoditize mitigation actions as opposed to adaptation actions. But in a nutshell, yes, there is a very, very clear understanding at the global level that adaptation funding should be 50%, mitigation funding should be 50%. But there has been a lot of conditionalities even put to some of us who really want to access adaptation funds, because the process of access is so tedious and reticulate that sometimes you realize that even a project that you have proposed now that is very, very feasible to be implemented in the next 1 or 2 years cannot receive those funds until after, say, 5 or so years, because of the process of accessing the money itself, developing the proposal, first with the concept note, then the proposal, and doing several studies before you can be able to get your hands to the finance. So there's a lot anyway that is happening at the global level. And the problem is just there has been no goodwill regarding finance from the West. I mean, from the Annex 1 country.
Thank you so much, Okumu. There has been no goodwill coming through in regard to finance. And at the same time, there are issues when you talk about accessing that money. And I would want to come to Salina, who is in the civil society sector. What exactly should we do? I mean, you have all these issues. What do you think we should do to overcome these challenges?
So, thank you. It's an interesting question. Let me first of all start with, let me go back a little bit to 2015, the finance conference in Addis Ababa. The international community made it very clear to the countries of the global south to go home and do domestic resource mobilization. We were asked to do that. We were told that there was no more public funds. The money was in the hands of the private sector and in the pockets of the philanthropists. So they made it very clear. Now, Mike is talking about, they tell us, take this money and do this and not do this. It is someone else's money. And as long as you continue accessing someone else's money, it is going to come with conditions. You and I, we were in Madrid for COP25. And we as Africa, we put two things on the table. We said adaptation. That is what we are going for. And we also said we are a continent with special needs and special circumstances. But I think the problem is at the level of our African group of negotiators. What are they saying? What do they need to be able to put to the table for them to be able to be heard and for them to be able to negotiate and actually come with a 50-50 instead of being imposed on by people because it is their money. So I think that we start with there. Our African group of negotiators, they need to negotiate well. Now, coming back to the things that Mike was also talking about, we need to look at capacities. Capacity building is critical, not only for the grassroots, as Lydia is talking about, but also for us as civil society. We are currently implementing a project, a GCA project in 10 countries in Africa, where the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance is the node that is facilitating this. And it's about CSO readiness. And we've just realized it's critical. We've developed a toolkit that I really want to bring to the attention of people to look at it and see how can we build the capacities of civil societies and also capacities of communities for them to be able to access these funds. We've also done a survey very recently that is showing to us those vulnerabilities that Lydia is talking about. What is coming out? What are the problems and what needs to be done? And we're seeing a lot. Lack of capacities is coming out as a very critical area of work. And then you have also issues of gender inequalities where women access less because women have no capacities to be able to develop these bankable proposals. And then there are so many. We are just trying to analyze the data right now. And it's good to look at that because it will help us understand what we need to do best. And we've developed a TOT for training also at community level to support communities to understand these processes, raise their awareness, and also to be able to assist them. So actually, let's look back at ourselves and say, what should we do? Starting from our African group of negotiators, our capacities as civil society to hold our governments accountable, and how much are we doing at the community level regarding capacity building and awareness raising. Yes.
Interesting perspectives there. So we have a problem. We have to also look from within and reflect on, can we actually curate solutions to these problems? Can we even build our own capacity? And coming to you, Bwana Michael, from NETFUND, you are in the research innovation sector, and we know there are so many young people who would want to do something about climate change. They have innovations. How do you really support them to think about solutions? How do you, for example, enable them access financing for climate solutions?
Julius, thank you. Let me get a little bit more specific to NETFUND, and then I'll talk about this in general. As NETFUND, we recognize and appreciate the difficulties and the challenges that innovators are facing, especially for climate innovation. And in that respect, we designed a program. It's called NETFUND Green Innovations Award. And this project, or this program, because it constantly runs, has two particular aspects. Number one is to identify and recognize innovators in this space who are doing something, coming up with social enterprises that are supporting climate adaptation, or innovation and technology that is either going into mitigating climate change or helping communities to adapt. We recognize them, we award them, but most importantly is that we support them to commercialize their innovations. So we give technology support, technical support, and we also build their capacity in entrepreneurship so that they're able to translate their innovation into something that can provide solution and therefore create demand, and people can buy, and therefore increase production and dissemination of such kind of technology. So that's a program that runs. It runs for every 2 years. It's biannual because it takes really a long time to do incubation for these projects. So every cycle we actually advertise this, and innovators apply. We do reviews. We have a team of experts that looks at them and decides which ones are viable for commercialization or for further development. Now, this is in recognition of what we call the valley of death. In innovations, they say when somebody innovates, they are very enthusiastic, they develop the technology, and then it gets to a point when the technology is just ready for the market, they don't know how to get it into the market, so that enthusiasm drops, and they go down, they don't have finances, everything. So at that point, they go down, and we call it the valley of death. It is the point at which innovations get lost. They die. So that's where we are coming in, because we actually give grants. We are like an individual investor, but beyond that, we link them with other investors. There are a number of innovators that we have supported. I'm glad to hear that there was one of them here, John Magiro, who has now formed, is now a director of his own company. And we we actually identified the boy when he was running that hydropower using bicycle rims. The rims. You see? So over time, he's now running actually a power station, a power plant, and supplying, distributing energy. So this is where we come in. And there are other actors. We have Kenya Climate Innovation Center, KCIC, who is also working very hard with the climate innovators. There are the opportunities like the Kenya Kenya National Innovation Agency, which was also established for this very purpose, to support innovators. Of course, for them, they support innovations across all, across the space, but of course, with climate change included.
Interesting, interesting. Thank you very much for that response. So we are building and supporting our homegrown solutions to the climate problem and also providing financing to them as much as we can. Now, this is an interesting bit of the conversation because I know we have the entire discourse around, for example, what the global community needs to do, the developed countries for that matter, and what we in the developing countries need to do. But just to diversify this question to you, Lydia, and then also I'll get views from Michael Okumu. What is the place of the general public?
Thank you, Julius. I would say that the place of the community is one, at the prioritization of the interventions that have to be undertaken. They have to come up with viable solutions to their issues so that it's not just top-down. Somebody seated somewhere saying, go and do this. So when the communities prioritize their interventions, they really own those processes, and there is huge chance of sustainability because they'll be able to take care of their baby. And then the other role is advocacy. The communities have to advocate for the issues that they feel can benefit from. Like, for example, in the Lower Eastern region, we have advocacy groups. And these advocacy groups pass their message through folk dance, through poems, mashairi, and they are able to reach out to the topmost leadership. So when we have these advocacy groups within the communities, they are able to voice out the issues that are a thorn in their flesh. And then the other bit is also for the communities to undertake what they are able to undertake in their own capacity. Like, for example, in ensuring that they grow trees that are environmentally friendly to their area, and then also ensuring that they take care of the environment, not to allow people to cut their trees anyhowly, not to allow people to take away sand anyhowly. So there are things that the communities can do in their own capacity, and there are those that they can voice out to the larger leadership. And the other one is to ensure that they connect with climate change actors that are doing climate change work on the ground, and to ensure that they do projects that are really addressing their issues. I'm happy about Makueni because when people think about a project, they are nowadays thinking of a project that can benefit many people, not like in like 5 years ago, when people used to say, we just want a toilet in our school. So they are looking at bigger projects that can address their issues.
Great, that's a really interesting intervention. Okumu, are there supportive infrastructures, regulations, policies that allow us to take this discourse to the people and have them talk about why they should be part of the climate solution, but also some financing for their solutions?
Yeah, thank you very much, Julius. Let me say that if there is a country that has elaborate policy and legislative framework, it is Kenya. It is said elsewhere that there are some countries that just come and copy-paste Kenyan policies and they change the name of the country. It is called what? Find and replace. They find their Kenya and replace with the name of their country. Then they go implement it. Then we go later on to benchmark with them. So as regards policy, yes, we have a very, very comprehensive policy and legislative framework that enables climate action in Kenya. Of course, you all know that we started in 2010 by the first National Climate Change Response Strategy that gave birth to the first NCAP, and the first NCAP subsequently gave birth to the Act, to the policy, and to even sectoral policies and so on. So yes, we have a lot of policies and plans that resonate or that enhance or enable climate action in Kenya. Let me point out that down to the county level, it is by law required that even CIDPs and so on integrate or mainstream climate change issues in their plans and so on and so forth. So the infrastructure is very elaborate. And now talking now on climate finance and specifically going down to the grassroots, let me say that we have a very elaborate and ambitious kind of program that we call FLOCA, that is Financing Locally Led Climate Action. This is a program that is being driven by the Climate Change Directorate together with the Climate Finance Unit of Treasury. And currently we are also getting support from World Bank to be able to jumpstart this process. And the aim of FLOCA is basically to ensure that communities or actions at community level are, or communities come up with actions, having analyzed their vulnerabilities, they are able now to come up with proposals that are fundable, that address those particular vulnerabilities at community level. So, well, in a nutshell, yes, there is very elaborate, very elaborate policy infrastructure and all that.
Thank you.
All we need just is action.
Thank you very much for that. I would want to take very quick views. We all understand that the climate COP is coming up in November in Scotland, Glasgow. And climate finance, climate money will be a key issue at that global climate talks on how we should handle the climate change problem. So what would be your messages, colleagues, to the world leaders in a nutshell? Because we've talked about a couple of challenges. We've talked about accessing, we've talked about inadequate finance, we've talked about why we need more money at the community level. So what would be your message, starting with you, Salina?
First of all, we have to be very clear that it happens physically. Because if it's going to happen virtual, we look at Okumu on the screen is having a lot of difficulties talking to us. So it had better be physical so that our messages will go to the right places. So let's start with that. We need it physical. My message actually would be around accountability. Yeah? To say to the global institutions that have made all these promises that come through with your promises. Whatever you committed to, and our advocacy should be around that, around accountability. But I just want to add also that something big that has come here around this discussion is that capacity issue, which I think we need to pay a lot of attention so that the people in Makueni, for example, are not left behind. Nobody should be left. I think that was the spirit. Leave no one behind. And if you don't want to leave no one behind, the message then is that we need the capacities of communities to be built because they cannot hold anybody accountable for something that they do not know about. You hold people accountable for if you understand what the issues are. So for me, those two are very key, accountability and capacity building. I'll leave it at that.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Okok, what would be your message?
My message to the global community and world leaders would be that let's stop being selfish. Let's be a little bit liberal with climate finance so that every community, every country can access the funds for their particular climate needs and not for somebody else's needs. that speaks to the question about adaptation money. You know, even if it means ring-fencing a certain amount for adaptation, I think that will be a good way to go.
Interesting. Lydia?
Yes, I would say that first of all, they increase the resources. Because the priorities, or rather the identified interventions are so much vis-a-vis the little amount that is accessed at the community level. We are also saying that it's important that they shorten the processes. Like, for example, if you do a concept or a process this year, we are expecting that it will happen in maybe the following year. But when it takes like 3-5 years, then it doesn't come when it is needed. And then lastly, it's important for those that are giving the money to listen to what we are speaking to them. Because we understand our situation and we know what is best for our country and our region at large. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okum, what would be your message? And I know you're a policy maker, but what would be your message looking at colleagues in the developed nations, but also at the multilateral level? What would be your message to the world in the upcoming COP26 in Glasgow?
Yeah, my message, interesting anyway. My message to the world is, number one, let's learn from COVID. COVID has taught us that no one is safe until everyone is safe. Huh? So with the climate change, especially some of us that are in very, very vulnerable countries, some people may feel they are safe wherever they are, but the truth is some of these things move slowly across the world. So no one is safe until everyone is safe. So remove the bottlenecks that are put especially towards access of the money. We have a lot of conditions that are put and roadblocks that kind of hinder access of very vulnerable people to climate finance. And yet the people who don't need the finance want like either to hold on to the finance and get good projects and get through other multilateral or other channels so that somehow they still benefit from the same. So it is my sincere expectation that going into COP26, world leaders, and thank God at least we have a leadership from US that is pro-climate change, that is one plus, but it is not good enough. We need really very, very bold steps from developers. Number one, in climate finance, and number two, in ambition. They can't push us to increase our ambition all the time when they are really doing very little. And if they could only just reduce emissions from their end by just 1 or 2%, that is enough for all of what Africa is emitting as a continent. So, number one, they should show leadership in support, availing the finance, and also in ambition, showing that they are able to do very radical things to be able to cut emissions, global emission. But over and above that, we also have technologies that they are like hoarding that could easily help developing countries to be able to even bypass some of the hurdles that we are having. For instance, if we had better technologies in terms of, our farming systems, our energy systems, and so on, we would be able to go very fast in terms of development, enhancing our resilience, and also progressing as far as development is concerned. Okay. And at the same time, being able to keep emissions low. So our dream is a climate resilient development pathway, but they are really trying to choke it. Moving towards that has been very difficult. We try much, but the impacts around us push us back every time by several miles behind. So thank you, Julius.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all those powerful messages, and I believe they will reach the right audience. And we would want to now see what our Art in Action team has been up to as this discussion has been going on. To you, Billy, what have you been doing?
Well, thank you, Julius. The Art in Action segment has been extremely busy. I mean, they are on the money. And I would think it's only fair that we get to meet our artists and get to know a little bit about them and about what they do. So I'm going to start out here with Victor. So Victor Ndula is predominantly a digital artist, a digital illustrator, and actually a political illustrator. And I think you would want to interact with Victor's portfolio, Victor's work, and just get to see the body of work that he has consistently been putting out. So if we could have that. So in the meantime, I have been observing what Victor has been working on. And Victor essentially has the earth at the consultant's bench. And the earth has gone to see the therapist and has been feeling neglected lately. And I'm just going to say that about that for now because Victor is still hard at work. But Victor, there's only one thing I would need to ask you. If we want to interact with more of your work, are you online? And if you are, how shall we find you and how can we interact with your portfolio?
Yeah, my work is online. I have put my stuff on social media. There's a Facebook page and there's a Twitter handle, as well as Instagram, because then I'm also reaching out to the generation that would spend more time on social media, so they'll be able to see the kind of work I do as well.
Awesome. Yeah. So that's Victor, and that's where you can find his work. It's on social media. Please interact with Victor's work. It's quite a treat. Celeste is currently working on the Green Climate Fund. I tell you, Julius, she has really interpreted the conversation quite expertly. Celeste, you want to tell us where we can interact with your portfolio online?
Absolutely. My Twitter handle is at Tunes by Celeste, and I'm also on Facebook groups. Just type Cartoons by Celeste. You'll find all my work there.
And then at this end, I have Olonde with me. Now, he's illustrating with a difference because he is essentially illustrating by hand. And he has been also interpreting the conversation from several different angles and through several different perspectives. You want to work and interact with the work of these illustrators because at the end of the day, they take the very challenging conversations that happen from amongst our panels and package them in a very interesting, visual, multi-dimensional way and communicate that to the public in a way that I think is going to be absolutely unforgettable. Olonde, if we want to interact with your other work, your other body of work, your portfolio elsewhere, where should we go?
My work is online. You can just search Omondi Olonde, but I'm also on Facebook at Modi and Omondi. So you can find my work there. And also, everyone is welcome for a visit. My home is at Katito. So if you are around there, you'll see the work is there. A lot of work I have at home there. So you can be able to see that.
Well, thank you, Olonde. His portfolio is online. His portfolio is also at home, and you are welcome. And I'm sure there's going to be a cup of tea as well. Thank you, Olonde. That's our artist for you. Still hard at work, still waiting for the big reveal.
Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure getting to know the artists and the kind of work they do. And it's really interesting. And we were waiting to see exactly what they come out with from such an amazing discussion. To you, Wanja. Wanja, are you there? We would want to see and hear what colleagues are saying online. Are there any comments, questions that we might need to respond to and to take note of? Wanja, to you.
Yes, hi, Julius. Thank you so much for a great discussion. I would say that the conversations and the comments here are quite lit. So I'm going to get straight to the questions. We have Peter Chemutai, and Peter is asking, how does carbon trading relate to climate finance? So Julius, I'm just going to go through the questions, and then I'll leave you to manage them between the panelists. So that's the first question. The second one, which is a comment really from Game, he says that that climate money isn't trickling down, and those are big facts. And he says, yet I hear all the time there are funds for such work. They are few and far between, and the calls often go under the radar. We have Monica. How can indigenous women in rural areas access climate change finance? Then we have Griffin, who is asking, are there provisions of the climate fund to the effect of dump sites managed by the county governments, and any remedies on how they affect climate in those areas? Then we have Samuel Othiambo, who is asking, how do I access money down in the village? What's the clear structure of the flow of this climate money? And then we have Tony asking, are there qualifications to get this money? And then we have Bob Aston, who is asking, his question is to Michael Okumu. Any update on the operationalization of the National Climate Change Finance? No, of the National Climate Change Fund. And then Tony asks, is a comment actually, what makes it tricky to access and get these funds are the endless protocols. And we have a question here from Nashrat Chowdhury. I hope I said that correctly. What is the role of technology in enabling funding to reach the local level in a more transparent and efficient way? So Julius, those are some of the questions that we have managed to filter, and I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Wanja. They are coming in hot. These are quite a number of them. And thank you to all the participants for these interesting questions. I would like to just do it quickly. Okum, would you please respond to the carbon trading and finance one, as well as the National Climate Change Fund, operationalization of the fund, I think, and the Climate Change Council, I think. I'm not so sure. You could say something concerning that, and then we can come back to the other panelists in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, and thanks for those very good questions coming from the floor. One is the one on carbon trading, the relationship between carbon trading and carbon finance, and climate finance rather. Well, what we know is that, of course, and this has been most of the discussions today, that it is easier to commoditize mitigation aspects as opposed to adaptation. Carbon finance or carbon trading, if I may put it in a simple way, is simply if you are able to reduce emissions and quantify the much that you are able to reduce, and people, especially developed countries, are able also, or they are, I don't know how to put it in simple terms, but there are those who need to reduce their emissions, but they can't due to maybe economic reasons and so on. And so it is very expensive for them to reduce emission. So as such, they can be able to support somebody elsewhere to do mitigation kind of actions, and this emission reduction in terms of the carbon CO2 equivalents can be translated, quantified, and then they buy it as if they are the ones who have reduced that emission. So basically that is what carbon trading is all about. So that I buy the emissions you have reduced and I give you money for it. You don't account it anywhere. Mm-hmm. So that is how it comes into climate finance, in the sense that you are able to access that money now to do many things, including climate action. For the adaptation fund specifically, that money from the carbon sale of proceeds of trading is used to implement tangible adaptation actions on the ground. So that is how somehow carbon trading clearly relates to climate finance. Now, there was a question on the operationalization of the climate change fund. Mm-hmm. This is an area that has been that has taken quite some time. Reason being that the Climate Change Act and the Climate Finance Act had some conflict, in the sense that the Climate Change Act established the fund, yet the Climate Finance Act says that all funds in Kenya can only be established through the CPMF. The Climate Finance Act is the only act that is able to establish any fund. So as such, the problem that has been there is that there has been back forth between Treasury and the Ministry of Environment, in the sense that it has been the structuring of the fund has been a bit tricky, in the sense that agreeing on who heads what has been a bit tricky, but we are progressing in the sense that we are able to now discuss and agree on how to finalize it. But over and above that, we have the county funds that we have encouraged counties to come up with a replica or kind of a downscaled version of the climate change funds to be able to break the deadlock. Because the truth is that whatever legal challenges there may be in the two acts, it should not prevent the normal mwananchi from accessing climate finance. So
thank you.
That is being addressed, and we are going on very soon. On the Climate Change Council, there has been also a lot of progress, but the only challenge that we had for a long time has been the legal challenge by the civil society on the inclusion of the representative of the civil society in the Climate Change Council. So that court case has been going on for a long time, and that is what actually has impeded the operationalization of the National Climate Change Council. So the civil society is somewhat to blame for that, if I may say it like that. May I say something about the projects? There's been a lot of questions on how this climate money should trickle down to the grassroots.
In half a
unlike
second.
Other monies, climate finance, especially from global sources, can only be accessed through proposals. So, and this is something we are going to address to the FLOCA program, in the sense that communities are going to be able to come up with proposals that address their local vulnerabilities and local climate action needs. And as such, it would be possible for each and every individual at the grassroots to be able to access climate funding because of this kind of arrangements that will be like a bottom-up kind of arrangement, financing locally led action. So this locally led action is what we have now to make sure we have them in reasonable scales, because it is also very difficult to kind of finance or support very micro kind of programs or projects. But when we have community-based kind of problems being addressed as a community, it is able to help a great deal than helping individual households. May I stop there and allow maybe others to also weigh in?
Thank you so much, Okumu. And we will just have one last short intervention from our community person, just to give life to this in a brief 1 or half a minute.
Thank you, Julius, and thank you, Michael Okumu, for the contribution you've made. I would say that at the community level, the groups and the climate change governance structures that are there, they need to be strengthened so that they are able to access the climate finance at the county and at the national level. So the issue of capacity is very key, and the civil societies and other climate change actors need to look into that. Because like Okumu is saying, if the communities have to make proposals and maybe they do not have the skills, it means that somebody somewhere should do it so that they are able to present bankable proposals. Thank you.
Great. We're in a dispensation where we have to sort all these challenges out and make sure that communities are empowered to access the money, but also money is provided from those who have committed to provide it. We want to see what exactly our Art in Action team has come up with from the discussions we've been having this morning. To you, Billy.
So I'm going to start out with Victor. And Victor, you are going to tell us a little bit about what has been going on at your studio right here and how you've been interpreting the conversation that has been continuing from when we began. So, Victor, tell us about your work.
Thank you very much. It's been a very interesting panel. I have picked up a lot of things. My approach to my illustration, as per what has been discussed, is I wanted to do what we call personification of Mother Earth and bring it a bit closer home. And from the discussion that I've been listening to, Mother Earth hurts. She goes through a very difficult time. And at this point in time, she's really feeling neglected because where's the money? The money should have been provided. But I'm hearing of a lot of legal loopholes, money not being disbursed properly. When all this is happening, climate change is still a pertinent issue that needs to be addressed. So that was my approach, trying to bring it closer home, that people will be able to relate with it, that we still have an obligation to Mother Earth. We need to sort out our issues in terms of money and everything, and make sure that the money is there. So I captioned it that I've been feeling neglected lately. Where's the climate finance? So as much as it depends on the powers that be, please provide the money. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Victor. Victor, I'm going to ask you more of a personal artist's question. What has your reflection been as you are conducting this exercise? There's a part where you were doing your part as an artist, you're playing your role as an illustrator. But then there's a part where the conversation is impacting you, and then your interpretation of that conversation is also doing something to you. What is it doing to you?
I've always believed that there's the analogy of the man who found fish at the beach that had been beached, and there's so many of them, but he said, even if I throw in one or two, I've made a difference today. So that has been my approach. Through visual arts, through the way we communicate, I hope that this makes a difference, even in a small way, that this conversation will be sustained because of just one simple drawing.
Okay, so that is Victor's fish that he has just thrown back into the ocean. He has played his role today. I'm going to move on from Victor, and I will cross over to Olonde. And his approach has been different, very reflective and also very refreshing. Olonde has several pieces that he has put out, and he's been illustrating by hand. Olonde, you want to tell us a little bit about the work that you have been engaging in as you have engaged with the panel and the conversation?
First of all, I would like to thank the organizers and the participants, because forums like these are very few for an artist and for climate work. So I think these are commendable effort. If we can be able to do more of this, I think the public needs to be educated, because we have a lot of ignorance concerning climate. So my work is always, I approach it from two sides, because there's always a struggle between good and evil. So interpretations may be different for good and for evil. So I try to put that context into every work I do. So I try to work along conservation and also to show the reasons why we should conserve, because one of the speakers said there's a lot of money in conservation, because every one of us can do that. So my first work, I go back to Mr. Sketch, who said the egg is the symbol of life. So I've used that to interpret my first job, to show that life can give us flowers of smelling nice and fruits that can feed us. And also, life is Mother Earth. So as we conserve life, conserve Mother Earth. And then the second one, so I try to show where climate is. So I've interpreted environmental destruction as a tumor. So this guy has a very big tumor over on his head. So as we conserve, we treat ourselves of tumor, of destroying the environment. So that is how I've interpreted my second job. And then the third one, we talked about giving out the message of whatever is happening. So we are told those who are suffering the consequences of environmental distractions are not the one who destroyed the environment. So that's what I've tried to interpret here. Because this guy is very patronizing in the way he's speaking to the other person. So this shows the way our message is not being presented in the right way. And then lastly, I've talked about education. So I've presented it in the form of a book. And we are told in educating ourselves, the money is there. So there's a note inside the book to show that as we learn, we make our money.
Well, thank you so much. A lot of content, a lot of wisdom, and a lot of nuggets, all packaged into just 4 sheets of paper. Now, this is the beauty of art in action, is that after everything has been spoken about, after everything has been discussed, we have something visual left with us that gives us a library for a lifetime and beyond. Olonde, what has your reflective moment been as you are producing this work? How has the panel conversation and your interpretation spoken to you individually as an artist and as a stakeholder in climate action?
I used to think there was no money, but I think after all this, I know there's some money that may help.
So panelists, there you have it. You have just enlightened us that there is money and how we can locate it. So thank you so much, Olonde. Now let me come back to Celeste, my former schoolmate, whom I have known for several years. So Celeste,
yes.
Tell us about your work. Tell us about your piece.
So my piece is basically notes. I decided to take the angle where I capture whatever you're discussing about in visual notes. So whoever has listened to these conversations, taking a glance at my visual notes is basically doing a recap an easier way to remind themselves of what we've talked about. And I've tried to compress as much as possible whatever we've discussed here into something more fun and more interactive, something that is exciting to look at and memorable. A lot of people find it hard to read notes or to listen to 2 hours of a conversation, but taking that and packaging it as a single snapshot visually, I think is a much better way. So that's the angle that I decided to take. And I drew a big pot, you can call it that, a pot of money. And in that pot, there's a man seated there, counting money and basically telling us that there is money from international sources, from local sources, but where is it? What is the money for? So I've tried to capture all that in my drawing, and I hope it's self-explanatory.
Well, thank you so much, Celeste. That's a lot of content, again, captured within one frame. You would think that that content would crowd the frame, but you would be surprised that she has laid it out extremely well, even without explaining it. I think it just completely absorbs itself into the subconscious. Celeste, yes. As I've asked Victor and as I've asked Olonde, you're reflecting.
For me, I think what has stood out for me is that, first of all, the money is there, but accessing it is what is difficult. And if only we can find a way to cut the red tape, make things simpler. The local communities, people like me and you, we need to access that money, but the complexities around accessing that money is truly discouraging. So if there's a way we can figure out how to access this money in a more simpler way, I think that's my takeout for me, and it would really be impactful for the communities and artists like myself to use that money for stuff like this, outreach, telling people more about climate change, making our small contributions to climate in our gifted areas. So it's been very enlightening, and I'm glad to be a part of this.
Well, thank you so much, Celeste. Thank you so much, illustrators. I think it's only fair to take it back to the panel and ask, what are your observations? What are your thoughts? How do you react to what you've just seen? So, Julius, you will indulge me and allow me to hijack your panelists for just a moment. Brief comments on your reaction to the work that you've seen. May I begin with Lydia?
I would say that based on the discussions, the community is down there suffering. The money is on the other side, but in between there's a mountain. How do we clear the mountain to have the communities accessing the funds? Thank you.
Okay. Salina, your reaction to the artwork that you have seen, does it represent adequately the conversation you've had?
Yes, very much so. And I think we are saying the money is there. And I believe that the kitty is not full, that the promisers, those who made the promise, should actually fill the kitty. And then now we found the best way to access, and that the money trickles down to the community level.
Well, thank you so much, Salina. Michael, what do you have to say?
I find this very interesting. I didn't know that all these things we have said here can be put into one, just an image. And I was quite thrilled by Olonde's image about a fat guy bullying the small man. And I know the man is really thin, shaggy, like he's really suffering there. This man is bullying him. So it really creates exactly the global politics of climate finance. So I think that's what I have seen, and it's very interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much. That has been quite some work. I don't know how long I could take just trying to sketch anything that you have done, but that is very brilliant of you trying to condense all those ideas into sketches and pictures. And I think this is a very great way of trying to package some of the things going forward so that maybe in our curricula and so on, we are able to inculcate some of these values into our children as they grow up the education ladder, so that they end up being climate literate citizens, citizens who are able to respond to the climate change challenges around them and provide solutions to the problems around. Regarding the money and its availability, I tried to put it loudly and somehow part of it. We don't need to stop and just and wail and complain about the unavailability of global money. Whatever little we have in our pocket can start with as we wait for the big money. You always lalanja. Sorry if anybody does not understand Swahili. You have some small resources and you are expecting some external resources, and there is it is getting dark. You have just to work with what you have. And that is a good starting point for us moving forward and having very, very successful climate action on the ground. I know we are able to do much. Yes, we need external support, but we can do with the little that we have to make some reasonable progress. Thank you very much, and thank you for that great artistic work. Thank you.
Julius, of course, I would need to ask you, what are your thoughts? Do you feel like your panel conversation has been well represented by the panel of illustrators?
Absolutely, yes. I do feel that, and I do confirm. And for me, what just stood out is the fact that we can put all this in one page, as Michael said it. But importantly, the lessons that are coming out from even the communities themselves, airing the voice that we need this finance. Yes, we can definitely pull the little we have, but at the same time, even if we pull the little we have, we need it to be complemented because it's not sufficient. So we need the people who promised to provide the money, and it's in one image. I can't even believe how you do that. And then you have the same image saying that even that which is available domestically or internationally needs to be accounted for. So there's a big guy who comes in and says, you know what, I have this money, but I'm here, you are a small guy, and you need to do a couple of things. So we need to cut the red tape, as was mentioned. We need to even think about how to ease the channel, as Lydia said it. So I'm finding it really fascinating having all that in one image. And I think, to be honest, Bwana Michael Okumu and colleagues, this is what we need to take to some of these international spaces, for people to really see exactly what the problem looks like. Because up there, people don't see it. We are lost in conversations that are very technical, but this gives life to the entire conversation. Billy.
Thank you so much, Julius. Art, climate action, climate change is felt, seen, it's experienced. And so art carries that experiencing into climate action. This has been Art in Action, a very, very engaging and enlightening and stimulating segment, as you've all seen and heard.